So let's hop across and rope in Mukesh Aghi into this conversation. Mukesh ji, set this up. Where are we? Where are we? You know, a lot of brick building has happened. Joe Biden is, of course, choosing that at the very end of his first term. But at the end of the first term, he's going whole hog. It's as much pomp and show, and every honor that can be given is being given. But what is the context in which we are arriving at this point?
There are multiple factors which is driving this event, where you have a state honor for the Prime Minister and joint session of the Congress for the Prime Minister. I think one is you have to look at geopolitically. But what has happened is that we are seeing US struggling to deal with the rise of China, and China taking a position which is very assertive and aggressive. And you have India, which has almost 2,000-mile border with China, eyeball to eyeball, pushing back China. So India is one country which has stood up to China, and the US realizes that. And so I think China plays a critical factor. The second China factor is you have most of the large US companies manufacturing coming in from China. And every boardroom in the United States is asking their CEOs, what is your de-risking of supply chain from China? And that's where India comes in. You mentioned the example of Apple. I can cite 20 other companies who have done that quietly itself. And and at the same time, it's not just de-risking. When you have 1.4 billion people whose per capita income is rising on an annual basis, fastest than any other economy in the world, their purchasing power will go up and they will buy those products itself. The second factor which I see is the Indian diaspora. You have roughly 5 million Indian Americans. Their per capita income is twice the national average. Their education is the highest. Their participation in civic societies is one of the largest itself as a minority group. So they are becoming not only a contribution to national campaign from a political side, but they're also becoming swing voters when you look at states like Colorado, Arizona, Texas. So those factors are driving these two leaders to come together, and both have to face the election next year. So I think it's a good way to send a message that India is being recognized as a rising power, and for President Biden to say to the rest of America and the Indian Americans that I have hosted your Prime Minister. I am opening up India for the US companies, and I'm partnering with India to deal with China.
Okay, I was about to ask you what's in it for Joe. The same thing happened with Donald Trump last time around, and he got this literally one cricket stadium full of people, to send some imagery back home on. On a more practical basis, where is the American focus on? You'd think it's now on Ukraine. It's no longer on the war on terror. It's on China. Is it a divided house? There is a confusion in priorities?
No, I think you have to understand when you compare. Let me just answer your first question with President Trump and President Biden. You have to understand President Trump was a transaction president, whereas President Biden approaches the whole issues with a very structured approach. He has a very consistent policy-making team which have decided that India is pivotal from a technical aspect, from a geopolitical aspect, from an economic aspect, and from domestic agenda. So they're driving it cohesively towards that. Now, to answer your second question, basically, you have to understand the priority shifts. Yes, when the Ukraine war started, emotions were high. But I don't think President Biden's priority has shifted. Basically, that has become like a daily chore. They're supplying weapons, they're training, and the process continues. Where they're highlighting is that India is critical for us. India is important for us from an economic perspective, or from a global environment perspective. So I think it is in the interest of the United States to have 1.4 billion people who speak English as a main language, democracy, same value system, to be partnered with the US.
Okay, but there still seems to be a push which is not digested easily here where I'm sitting, sir, of wanting to tell India that your human rights are not figured out, your democracy is not figured out, your freedom of the press and freedom of religion is worse than Afghanistan. It we're open to criticism, but some of it doesn't make sense. I'm a journalist here, and I know I'm certainly don't know there's no gun behind my head right now from the Taliban on what to be doing. So it seems almost ludicrous. Why does that audience still exist?
So you have to understand that in a democracy, you will always have certain fringe talking about this. We don't agree on all these statements on issues of human rights or freedom of press. I think you have to understand people will voice those. And the issue is the same in the United States. You talk to the African Americans, they will say our human rights are been taken away. You talk to the other minority groups. So I think both sides have to, and they have the maturity to deal with these issues. I don't think President Biden come back and told Prime Minister Modi that please work on human rights or please work on freedom of press itself. So I think you will have fringe speakers on these issues. And for example, you have two members of the Congress who will be basically not attending the joint session because they don't agree on treatment of Muslims in India. But, so I think let them speak. It's a democracy. You don't have to agree what they say, but they can speak and that will continue.
Okay. Before I let you go, sir, what is your perception? We're watching visuals on our screens of Ambassador Jaishankar, who's now the External Affairs Minister, then of course of Prime Minister Modi. There's NSA Doval. There's a whole team India now. What have we got right in the past 8-9 years? Part of the story was inevitable. Part of the story was just a moment in history. But something seems to be clicking in place that we are growing rapidly, and and the prestige and etc. is following.
So I would say three factors which has driven this. One is you have a prime minister who has focused on raising the quality of life of a citizen. That means go build infrastructure, go create jobs itself. And he realizes this will only happen when you're able to get international capital coming in, where you're able to get technology coming in especially from the United States itself. So early on, here's a man who was not given visa to the United States, but he basically kept that personal issue aside and looked at the better interest of India and the United States and was basically gracious enough to move forward from that perspective. But more important is India is growing 7% this year. It will grow again 6.5% next year. It is an engine of growth, and it is impacting positively the United States. When you place an order for 200-300 aircrafts, you buy drones from the United States, and you are basically procuring other stuff. It has an impact on the job creation in the U.S. But more important is in the long term, what we are seeing is that U.S. dependence on India, especially on skilled resources, especially on generic drug, will go up and up and up. And that's where I think you see a mutual benefit coming in. Okay. So I think, and then the final thing I like to say is you have a foreign minister who communicates very clearly, who thinks strategically. And he has come out very clearly India's position on Ukraine, India's position Quad, on US-India relationship. So I think it's the messaging, communication, and execution which is driving the current strategy of the government.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mukesh Aghi, for putting a very mature perspective on what is going on. I really appreciate you taking out time for NewsX. Once again, Mukesh Aghi there joining us on the telecast.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.